Hey everyone, this is Ira with the library's Makerspace. Thanks for tuning in today to learn about how to make your own Christmas ornaments in the online 3D modeling program called TinkerCAD. So this video ended up actually being a lot longer than I thought it was going to be when I compiled everything. It's about 43 to 44 minutes long, so um, it does go over basically all of the tools that you'll need to know in order to make your own models in TinkerCAD and take existing objects and combine them to make models for 3D printing. So if you've never used TinkerCAD before, I'd highly recommend watching that part of the video. And then around the 44-minute mark or so, that's when we're going to get into the actual modeling exercises where we'll do 4 different ornaments. So feel free to skip ahead if you want. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed the video and stay tuned. Thanks. Okay, so the first thing you want to do before we get started is you want to go over to tinkercad.com. TinkerCAD is a browser-based 3D modeling program, so you just need an internet connection and a browser. I'm using Google Chrome. You should be able to use pretty much any other browser. I've used this on Firefox. Yeah, so you want to get online and go over to tinkercad.com, and then what you're going to want to do is click on Join Now. And essentially, you want to create a personal account. The quickest way might be to have your parents make it for you first. That's kind of the easiest and quickest way to get started modeling. If you're under the age of 13, if I remember correctly, there's a verification process that they got to go through to prove that you can use it, or that you have your parents' permission. So it might be the quickest to just have one of your parents sign up for you, and then you can always change your information after that. So once you get all started, then you want to click into sign in, and then we'll start modeling. All right, so there's just one other thing I want to go over before we start modeling. It's basically on best practices for 3D modeling. So right here, we're in this program called Cura. This is what we use at the library to 3D print items that people want us to 3D print for them. But this essentially shows you 2 models that are going to be printed at on one of our printers, and it shows you the orientation of each. And I bring this up because it's really important to try to model your things so they sit flat on the build plate, which this is the build plate right here. So you can see with this articulated dinosaur thing, it is sitting super flat and will print super easily. This gecko guy right here, this will print fine. It's going to be printed flat right here, but where you see this red stuff right there, that's going to need what's called support. And that's essentially just some extra plastic that's printed just below the model on the build plate in order to provide support to the model once it's getting built up like this. Pretty much any model that has an angle like this that's 45 degrees or less will need support. I'll show you what that looks like. We'll click on preview up here. So that's what the support is going to look like. If we just zoom down here, it's basically just this plastic material right there that you can rip off once it's done printing. There's a little bit that's going to need to get printed too with this guy right here. As you can see, there's some angles up here that will need some of that support. So it's really easy to remove that, but it's always best practice to try to model things so they sit as flat as possible. So I'll give you an example. Say if I wanted to 3D print this gecko on his side for some reason like that, you're going to need a lot more support than him sitting flat. I'll show you why once this gets done doing its slicing thing. I'll click on preview. Just a sec. You can see, so now that you have it set up at this angle to print, there's going to be all this extra support material that's printed, which just kind of adds, it's a little bit extra waste of plastic. So that's just kind of an example right there of you don't want to print things, 3D print things like this at weird angles like that. You want to make sure they're super flat. So going back down, rotate this back down. So it'll sit flat. So a little bit of support is okay, but you definitely want to try to model things so they don't have a bunch of different overhanging angles. You know, like so this wouldn't have angles all around itself. He's got a little bit. I mean, he's got some support there, some there that you'll have to rip off once it's printed, but it's super easy to remove. But you just want to, as best practice, it's really good to kind of have things try to sit flat and minimize support if you can. So this just a note on that before you get into 3D modeling. Okay, so now that we are ready to go and sign in and start modeling, I'm going to sign in. Just a second. All right, so now I'm going to go over the interface of TinkerCAD. First thing you'll come to is my recent designs. So you'll see some ornaments that I had started working on and some other stuff. This is the area where your models that you create are going to be saved. And they're saved in your cloud account, so they won't go away. So you want to click on Create New Design, and you will be coming to the work plane modeling area. So for those of you who have never used TinkerCAD before, I'm going to go over the interface just briefly to kind of give you an idea of how to navigate yourself around. So the first thing you'll notice is this work plane. So this is where you're going to put all of your shapes that you grabbed from over here, such as this box, etc. And you can think of the work plane as the 3D printer bed that the model is going to get printed on. This is basically just a flat plane that you use to build your models from the work plane up and fuse different shapes together, etc. Now, if you go over here to the left, this is your cube view and your home view. So if you click, if you're going into modeling and kind of looking at different aspects of your shapes and sort of get, as you can see, your view kind of, I wouldn't say messed up, but you really change around your view a lot, like I'm doing right there. You can always click your home view to go back to this view that you come to right when you log into TinkerCAD. You can also use this cube view right here to change your perspective. So going from the top view down, going from the right plane, from the back, left, bottom, etc. So next up we have this thing called Fit in All view. So I'll show you what that does if you just grab these objects right here. And say you want to confuse them together or cut one shape out of another. Instead of being stuck in this view right here, if you click on Fit in All view, it's going to zoom you up close to all of the objects being fit into your view. Then you've got this zoom in and zoom out command, which you can also do. The quickest way that I've found to do this is to use your middle scroll mouse button to scroll in and scroll backwards. And then another thing, when you really want to use a computer mouse for modeling, it's going to be much easier than trying to do it using a touchpad on like a laptop. One of the other sort of things you want to note is that to orbit around, it is the right mouse button that you hold down and just move your mouse around, and you can orbit like this. And then the middle mouse button, the scroll button, so this one in the middle, you scroll up and down that you use to zoom in and out. If you click that and hold it, you can actually do this pan motion as well. And then the leftmost mouse button is your selection tool, so that you're going to use that to select all of your objects. So I'll take these right here and say if I wanted to do something with them, like try to fuse them together, and I'll show you guys how to do that. You first want to select all of them using that left mouse button, and they're all selected now as shapes together. So whatever action you do will happen to all three of those. All right, so moving along, you also have these two different views. So right now, you can switch to what's called orthographic view, which I wouldn't say is super helpful, at least not for me. It's a little sort of visually just doesn't work, but you can always model in this view. I always like to use the perspective view. It's just a little bit easier to sort of view the 3D space like this. So, but you can switch up your views just clicking that. So For now, I'm just going to stay in perspective view as we go through today's lessons. All right, so moving along, we're going to go over this section and then we'll spend a couple minutes on these tools up here, and then we'll get to modeling. So right here, in TinkerCAD, you basically take pre-made shapes and you can group them together. You can use one to cut through another one, and things like that. So you've basically got what's called your basic shapes. That's your first option. You've got things like text and numbers. You've got little characters that you can use to model. These things called connectors. So a lot of things you can explore first off if you don't want to stick with basic shapes. You've also got what's called shape generators, which I really, really like. It's just all of these shapes that people who use TinkerCAD a lot have created over the years. So feel free to explore this. There's a lot of interesting things that you could integrate into your models, and all you got to do, much like those basic shapes, is you just take the shape right there and just put it on your plane like that. And I'll go over how to modify it in just a minute. Okay, so yeah, it's definitely worth your time to kind of explore this section right here. It just gives you a really good idea of kind of all the options that you have. There's a little circuit section. We're not going to go over that today because it doesn't really have much to do with 3D modeling for 3D printing, though you can use it for that. We're just going to be sticking with all of the different kinds of shapes that you can use to create 3D models. All right, so as an example of how some of these tools work up here, I'm going to grab a couple things. I'm going to grab this box, grab a cone, as well as the roof. And to demonstrate how the tools up here work, I'm going to take this roof, sort of merge it with that. I used my leftmost mouse to do that, merging this with that. And if we highlight it using our left mouse button, you can do what's called group the objects. So if you click on group, it will fuse all three of those objects into one object itself, which is pretty cool. And that's one of the really handy tools with TinkerCAD, is that you can create newer shapes by assembling and grouping other different shapes together. So that is a grouped shape. If you want to ungroup it, all you got to do is click this button up here, or you can do on your keyboard Control-Shift-G to ungroup. That's a handy little shortcut. So if you click ungroup, that will ungroup these. Now they're back to their own three separate objects. Now when we click each one of these objects like that, you'll see that you have this option for the shape to either be a solid or a hole. So right now all three of these shapes are solids, and when they're grouped together to this, they all stay as one solid shape. But what's really cool with TinkerCAD is that you have the option to make things holes, or basically things that will cut through other objects. So like with this cone, and as you'll see too, with some of these objects, you have the option to play around with things like the radius, base radius, the height of it, and added, as you can see, like how many sides are added to it. So takes the cone down once you have three sides to more of a angular object like that. But anyway, so that's something also to keep in mind. With some of these shapes, you have the option to play around with these parameters. So that's something to explore as well, to just see how all of these shape tools work. There's not one with the roof, unfortunately. So you'll find some objects that don't have that option, and some like this one that does have options for basically changing up the shape using all of these different parameters. All right, now back to exploring these shapes as holes. So right now this is a solid. If I click on hole like that, this basically makes it I guess you could say a negative shape. Basically what this is going to do once we group this into this is that this shape, this edge of this shape is going to cut through this little weird box that we made. So I'll show you how that's done, and it's super easy. So once you have your a shape as a whole that you want to merge with a solid shape, all you got to do is highlight both of these, click on group, and there you go. You can instantaneously see that it has cut out that part of this shape and as well as left out this part based on the shape of the whole object. So we will go back up here. I'm going to ungroup that. And then I'm going to turn this back into a solid. But that gives you an idea of how that works, how you can use existing shapes and cut through things like this whole object right here, this or solid object, I mean. So if I click on this, make this a hole, I'll make this a hole again, I'll click on that, I'll merge these two with this object, and we can kind of see what it looks like. It's probably going to look kind of interesting, but yeah, so we'll see. So now those two are holes, this is a solid, we'll group that. And as you can see, it cut out that part right there, as well as left a triangle hole at the top. So yeah, it's a pretty cool function. I found that it's a really good way to make kind of different looking shapes from existing basic shapes that you have in TinkerCAD, which is a really powerful tool to have for 3D modeling. So I'm going to go up here to ungroup these again, and then I'm going to turn them back into solids. That one got turned back. All right, and we'll move on to the next section. One other tool that could be potentially useful for you if you've got a lot of objects set up on your work plane is called it's like a hiding tool. So it basically takes your model out of the view. So I'll show you how that works. So let's click this object, and we'll click this thing and hide the selected model. So click that and it'll disappear. This would be helpful if you had a lot of objects that you were working on to try to fuse together for like a complex model, and you just needed one or two or few or many of those models to be hidden from your view while you're working on modeling, say, on this object. It also might confuse you, which I could see that happening. It's definitely happened to me before. So if you've forgotten that you've hidden certain models, all you got to do up here is click that little light bulb and click on Show All. Click that, and that brings you back to being able to view all your models. The next thing we'll go over is the alignment view, or the alignment tool, I should say. That's really helpful for trying to get all of your objects aligned in a certain order, which we will actually use today when we're modeling some ornaments. So how it works is, let's say we've got this object right there. We'll just put this right there. Let's say we put that one up there. I'm going to zoom in like that. So to use the alignment tool, I'll highlight all three of these. And that's the alignment tool right there. So you click on that. And so it'll show you, actually, if you hover over each of these little circles, it'll show you how it's going to align the objects. So these will be aligned along that line right there. If you click right there, they'll be aligned right there. If you click right here, they'll be aligned going this way. If you click up there, it's going to be aligned in the workspace plane up above. So I'll just click this right there to show you. So, well, it worked with that one, but not the other. So let's say, click that. So that's aligning that to the tops of this. Whereas if you click this, this is aligning that to the bottoms of each of these. So I'll show you this more in depth when we are modeling up some ornaments, because we want to use that for making ornaments to basically make certain shapes align with one another so they look good. So, but that's just a look into the alignment tool, which you will probably use as you get into more modeling. All right, next up we've got our mirroring tool. So you click on that and you can actually flip the direction of your models using that tool. But one other thing it can do is if you click this and we're going to go up to this really cool tool called Duplicate and Repeat. Click that, and then we'll click the mirroring tool. We'll click it like that, and then it's going to make a mirror copy of that existing object. Then moving along, the import function, if you click that, you can import 3D models that you find to edit, like on the website thingiverse.com, which I'll show you how to get there. That's Thingiverse. This is where there's a bunch of different 3D models that you can download and have us 3D print for you. But the import option gives you that option to import a 3D model file from your computer. So that's really handy. The export function, you'll want to note, that is what you will export out and then email me to get your ornament 3D printed if you'd like to have it printed. So if you click on export, you can choose to include everything in the design or selected shapes. So you would need to, in order to have a selected shape, instead of everything, you'd need to select, say, that model right there, and then you'll have the option to do select shapes. For 3D printing, for our printers, the STL file format is the one you want to choose for that. So yeah, that's how you export that file out to get 3D printed. Is using the export function. You want to choose what in your design you want to export out. This would include everything, and you want to choose STL as the file format. Click that, and then it will save it as the file name. And you're given random file names in TinkerCAD, but if you click up, you can click up here and rename your file if you'd like. So that's the export function. There's also the send to function, which is a little more advanced. You could send your model into, it's called Fusion 360. It's another 3D modeling piece of software, but it's pretty advanced. So once you kind of get more comfortable with TinkerCAD and want to move past that, you can start using Fusion 360. But this is just an option to where you can start utilizing your designs that you make in here in Fusion 360. So, all right, moving along up here, we've got some other different options. So right now we're in the 3D design portion of TinkerCAD. You can move over to what's called blocks, which is much like kind of a Minecraft view. And you can play around in this area. If you click export though, you cannot, from what I can tell, whoops, yeah, you're not exporting a file for 3D printing. So I haven't played around with this enough. I've mostly just used TinkerCAD for 3D modeling, so it might be worth kind of exploring this area if you're into Minecraft and seeing what you can do with it. For today, I'm just going to focus on the 3D modeling area. But yeah, you can click that and that'll take you to the blocks area. Then if you click over here, it'll take you to the bricks area, which is basically kind of gives you a visual representation of your model, but in Lego form. So, and with this as well, you can't export this for cannot export this for 3D printing. So if you click on share, you can really only share a picture of your design that you make. So it's really only for sort of visualizing your model in a Lego type view. So there's those options as well. I just want to go over that real quickly, but for today, we're just going to go into the 3D design view and stick in there for today for making our ornaments. All right, moving along, we've got this work plane option tool right there. So what this does, it's actually really cool, is if you click, say, on this roof right there, click on work plane, and you can actually change the plane that you're going to work in to model. So right now, if you just chose this right there, it would stick to the same work plane that we've been on. But say if you wanted to put, I don't know, a sphere or maybe some text onto the side of this or to the side of that, or the top of this or the side of this right there, you use this work plane tool and then you choose which side of which object that you want to work on, and you click that, and then it changes, as you can see, the work plane to that side right there. So it makes it super easy. So I can actually click on the text tool right there, and it's going to place the text. It's going to look really funny because the text tool comes out pretty big, but it's going to place the text, as you can see, on the side of that roof because we just chose the side of that as our new work plane. So to get out of that, you just click the work plane tool one more time and then click that and then click anywhere out here, and that will get you out of the work plane that you're working in, which was this side to this, and back to the normal work plane area that we've been working in, this right here area. So as you can see though, it's really handy for, say, placing text strategically, like or other objects on the side of an existing object. As you can see, that's what that text tool did. It looks pretty funny right now, but that is what that tool does. So that might be handy for you as well in your modeling. All right, so we're going to briefly go over the ruler tool, which is up here. First, I'm going to delete these objects so you can highlight them and either press the delete key on your keyboard. I'm going to undo that. Going up here, click undo, or you can highlight those and delete them by clicking that little trash icon. So yeah, the ruler tool works like this. I'll show you. Click on ruler. We'll set it somewhat close to this object. I'll set it right there. And once you click the object, what the ruler tool does is it shows you the exact dimensions of your object. So this right here is 19.63 millimeters. Going from here to there, it is 26.52 millimeters going from that point to that point. It is 20 millimeters going from this point up to the top. And that number right there, that means that it is sitting flat. Its relationship to the work plane is 0 millimeters. Because it's sitting flat, it is 0. But if I took this little cone object and pushed it up there in the plane, you'll see that now it's 22 millimeters above the work plane. So I'm going to do the undo tool for that. Click that, get that back sitting flat on the work plane. And this also shows you the distance that it is from that point to this point. So that's 16 millimeters going that way. And from this point up to this point, it is 7.48 millimeters. And that's your option there. You can also choose what's called the midpoint, which would be choosing the middle of your model, the midpoint there, and give you distances for that. So if you click on use midpoint, it is 25.82 millimeters going from here to the midpoint of your model, and it is 20.74 millimeters going from this point of your model to the midpoint of the model there. So this is just a handy tool if you need specific precise amounts for specific objects that you make that you want to group together in a certain way or have them be away from each other certain distances. What's really helpful too is you can click on this and you can actually put in a new value. So I'm going to do 15 millimeters there. I'll click up to this and make it, instead of 26.52, I'm going to make it 20. So that's the ruler tool. We're not going to use it today, but it might be helpful for you in your future endeavors with modeling. And one other thing that I forgot to mention before we start getting into modeling these ornaments is to get out of the ruler tool. All you got to do is go over here and click on dismiss ruler. Click that and that will take the ruler tool away. So there you go. We'll move on to the next section. All right, well, I appreciate your guys' patience so far. I just really wanted to go over the interface of TinkerCAD to give you an idea of the specifics, tools that you're going to be using to model these ornaments. A few other things I'll go over before we start modeling is things such as the edit grid and snap grid tools. So if we click on this and say we want to move this object, I don't know, over there, but we want to do it really precisely. The snap grid tool is what we will use in order to snap basically our movements to the grid right here in 1 millimeter increments. If you click that, you have different options to go in all of these different increments. So if I click on that, do 5 millimeters, and if I have this highlighted and I use my arrow keyboard or arrow keys on my keyboard to move this over, so I'm not using my mouse to do this, I'm using the arrow keys on your keyboard. So it's moving over in 5 millimeter increments. Now if I click this and choose 0.1 millimeter, it's going to move it around in 0.1 millimeter increments. And you'll see, you can just kind of slightly see it moving. If I hold down the arrow button, it'll go a bit faster. But this is really good if you need to align objects or fuse objects together and you need really sort of precise measurements to them. You would use the snap grid tool right there to do that. For the edit grid tool, this basically just gives you the option to change your properties to either millimeters, inches, or bricks. I would highly recommend for making these ornaments and for modeling in TinkerCAD for 3D printing that you stick in millimeters. All 3D printers that I've worked on and used, they use the millimeters, the metric system. They use things in millimeters in terms of their build plates, in terms of how they, when you open up the object in the software that runs the printers, they really like millimeters. So I would get used to modeling things in millimeters, just for your sort of to make it easier for you in the future. And you've got this preset default length of 200 millimeters by 200, so it's on the work plane. Below here, it's going 200 millimeters this way and 200 that way, which should totally work. That is enough space for you to work in. So you can, of course, increase that, but you definitely don't need it to be super big. 200 by 200 should work fine for your purposes. Once we start modeling and you have objects highlighted, you're going to see a lot of visual cues pop up. So if I click on this right there, these little tools right there. So this basically, almost kind of like the ruler tool, gives you an idea of the width and length of this object. So if we click on this, it is 15 millimeters going this way. And I'm going to move this over. Click on that. It is 26.52 millimeters going this way. And now what you can do is you can click on this, and that's going to change the size of this like that. If you want to keep your proportions of this box, you want to hold the shift button and then click on that, and that should save it proportionally so it will look good and not kind of look all willy-nilly and wonky, kind of like this, and you'll get weird and wacky proportions. But it's kind of up to you and your taste of how you like to model things. But if you want to keep your proportions, when resizing your objects, make sure to click the shift button on your keyboard and then click on that box right there or this box, and just make sure when you're moving your left mouse button to resize it, that you're holding your shift button. Otherwise, if you don't, so I'm still holding my left mouse button down, it is changing up the size of this, but not proportionally. You also have the option to change the proportion of your object by each side. So basically, if you click on this, it's going to resize the object going this way. If you click on that, it's going to resize it going that way. If you click it on this side, it's going to resize it going this way. And if you click on that, it's going to resize it going that way. So it's not going to, it's basically just going to move in that plane direction. So, but if you click on this, those squares right there, that's going to change it on all of the sides. Okay, so then after that, you've got these really cool rotational option tools. So with your model, if you want to rotate it on this plane, you just need to click that tool right there, this right there, and you will be able to rotate it. And it's going to rotate in increments of, 22, 22. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get it highlighted. I'm going to change my view to the top right now. Click on top, make it easier. And click on that rotational tool, which actually just moved over there. And it's going to rotate in increments of 22.5 degrees. But what you can do if you don't want to be locked into the 22.5 degree increment of changes every time you rotate, you just click on this tool and you can actually free rotate to different angles, which we will use to our advantage when making some of these ornaments, because you can get really cool, interesting shapes if you get out of this sort of 22.5 degree rotation, if you kind of play around with the different angles that you can do. So we can rotate objects that way. I'm going to go back to our home view, click right there, and I'm going to zoom in using the middle mouse tool, mouse button tool, the zoom tool. And what you can also do, so you can rotate this way, you can also rotate in the upwards, they call it the Z-plane. So if you will rotate our view, we'll go back to front view right here. So we're at the front view, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit and just kind of move using the right mouse button, move up just a little bit to reorientate myself. Click on the object, and this is a rotate tool as well. As you'll see, you can rotate the object going like that, which is super handy and cool, especially for ornaments or really anything that you want to kind of reorientate and fuse or cut out of different objects. So again, as you can see, you're kind of, once you're in this area right here and you're holding down your left mouse button, you're locked into the 22.5 degree increments of your turns. But if you just keep holding your left mouse button and move up to here, you get the better option, at least in my case. For me, it just gives you a little bit more control over the degrees of rotation, which is really, excuse me, helpful for when you're creating things like ornaments or any kind of fun different objects for 3D printing. So there's that rotation tool as well that you can play around with. So the last object tool we'll go over is this cone tool right here, which we went over briefly in the ruler section. But if you click this, this basically gives you the option to take your object up the work plane like that, or below the work plane like that. It's super helpful if, say, you needed to add this to the top of a round roof like that, and you wanted to sort of, this isn't going to look perfect, but just to give you an idea of how this tool works, you take this, you move it down, and now it's going through, fusing with that tool right there. And let's say you wanted to rotate it. We'll use the rotation tool like that. And I rotate it again. Oh, it's going to be at a different weird angle because I use the rotation tool outside of the 22.5 increments. So now it's a little more aligned, but now we'll take this and move that up, and you can take this, click on that object. We'll use our left mouse arrow button. Oops. Snap grids on. We want to turn that back on. Left mouse button to fuse it like that. You can see those two objects are fusing together. But that just gives you an idea of how this tool works. What's super helpful too is if you have a bunch of objects that are up above your work plane and you don't want to have to use that cone tool function to move it down to the work plane. If you click and just press the D button on your keyboard, that will automatically shift it down and to the work plane area and have it sit nice and flat. So that is that tool. All right, and just before we get into starting to model, we want to go over these tools up here because they're pretty important and you will be using them, I would say, a lot, especially if you're going to try to make ornaments or really anything where you're duplicating certain shapes and making variants of particular shapes and want to just duplicate them or undo or redo things. So we'll click on this model as an example. And let's say I want to make a copy of this. So you go up to copy up here. You can also do Control C on your keyboard. I like doing that. It's a bit quicker than clicking, but it's up to you and how comfortable you feel doing that. But you'll click copy. And now what you want to do is click the paste tool, which you can do by also doing Control V on your keyboard. Click on paste, and that made an exact copy of your model, basically right next to it. You can take that and you can move it like that from that. Delete that. Another tool that I use a lot more than just the copy paste is called the duplicate. So we will highlight that, and it is called the duplicate and repeat tool, which is super helpful and handy. So you can do this by doing Control D on your keyboard, just making sure that your object is highlighted. I'm going to click this though, and if you click it, and it's going to make an exact copy, and it's going to be, you're not going to see that anything happened, but that's because essentially you made a copy in and of itself. So basically what you're going to have to do is then, once you use that tool, grab your model right there, and you'll see that a copy has been made of that. We're going to use the duplicate and repeat tool a lot making ornaments because with a lot of ornaments, there's definitely shapes that get repeated a lot. And this is just a really super helpful tool to use to make duplications of certain objects or parts of objects or things that have gotten cut out of objects to basically make it easier to duplicate them without having to copy and paste constantly. It's just especially for ornaments, I found it really works well as a great tool. All right, so the last three tools we're going to go over before we start modeling is the delete, the undo, and the redo options that you have at your disposal. So delete, as you could guess, means that if you have an object highlighted and you click on delete, it's going to, whoops, it didn't do it that time, but if you have it highlighted, click delete, it's going to delete it from your work plane and your project, so it will be gone forever. If you realize that you made an error in doing that, though, have no fear because you've got your undo button, which you can click right there. So if you click on that, it's going to bring the object you deleted back onto your work plane. If you decided you wanted to delete it again, you could click the delete button, or you could also click on the redo button, which will redo the previous action that you did, which was deleting that object. So if you click on redo, that's just going to delete the object again. So that's the function of those three. And yeah, we'll move on to the next section, which is the funnest, which is 3D modeling some Christmas ornaments. And one more tip is I found this. If you want to learn more keyboard shortcuts, I found this on the TinkerCAD blog. So if you go online to this, it's pretty helpful. It's from 2019, but it shows you a list of all of the keyboard shortcuts, such as like for moving objects, for copy, paste, etc. So yeah, that might be super helpful if you are like me and you like to use keyboard shortcuts. Okay, now we're on to the section that you've all been waiting for, is where you create your own ornaments. So thanks for taking the time to learn a little bit about TinkerCAD in the earlier part of this video, and we'll get to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a kind of typical snowflake looking design using the scribble tool, which is located right here under basic shapes. What we're going to do is we're going to create one arm of the snowflake, and then we're going to use that duplicate and repeat tool up here and use that multiple times to create the other arms of the snowflake. And then we're going to use, it's called the tube tool down here, to create the circle to hold the ornament onto a tree. So we will get started on that and go over the scribble tool real quick. So the scribble tool is right there. You grab that, put it on your work plane, and much like the name of the tool, you can do scribbles like that, and you will see up here on your preview little box up here what it's going to look like on your work plane. And then if you click on done, you actually get that's what your model will look like. So that's how the scribble tool works. It's pretty cool. You can get really creative with it. Of course, for this lesson, we do not want that shape. So we're going to go back over to the scribble tool, click on that, drag it over here to the work plane area. I'm going to make basically kind of the typical kind of snowflake looking image that you would see on certain ornaments or in cartoons. And I'm going to use these grids as a reference for making the first arm of the snowflake. So I'm going to first start by clicking right there and then going straight down. Whoops. And this doesn't need to be perfect. Since it's a scribble tool, it's not going to be a straight line, so don't worry about it being perfect. Just worry about being creative with this. That's kind of the big idea takeaway from this, is that you want to be creative with this. It doesn't need to be perfect. So as long as you're being creative and having fun, that's the goal. So all right, so we got the main sort of arm of the snowflake. I'm going to do the side arms using that part of the grid as a reference. So I'm going to go like this, bring it out like this for the first arm. I'm going to do the same on the left side. Go like that. And then I'm going to move down to this part of the grid and duplicate kind of the same thing, but down here. Take that, move it up like that. Take this and move it up like that. So as you can see, it's not totally perfect, but that's fine. It's not, we're not looking for it to be completely perfect. It's all about just kind of having fun with it and utilizing the tools that TinkerCAD has to be creative with it. So I'm happy with this for now. So I'm going to click on done. And as you can see, it's on your work plane, and it's actually it's pretty tall. So I wanna decrease the tallness of this model. Right now it's 10 millimeters. Click that. I'm gonna put it down to 2 millimeters. So it's will print easily. So that's the first arm. And then what I'm gonna do, I'm zooming out, and then I'm gonna use this top tool of your view cube. Click on that, and that will reorientate you to the straight down top view of your model. Now what I'm going to do is use the duplicate and repeat tool. Instead of clicking this constantly, I'm going to use my keyboard and do Control D. So I'm going to do that one time, Control D, so that a copy's been made. I'm going to use this tool right here to change the angle of orientation of it. I'm going to change it all the way to, I'm going to go to 90 degrees. I'm going to take that copy that we made and I move it down here to the base of the other arm. What's cool is that with the duplicate and repeat tool, when I do that, it should actually duplicate and repeat itself around this area. So you don't have to keep grabbing your model that you've duplicated and set it up down here at the base. So we'll try that right now. So I'm going to do Control D. See, right there. So it just made it on the base of that. And then I'm going to do Control D again, and so it made it on the base of that. So that's your basic shape of that sort of snowflake that we all kind of recognize, that shape. So now, right now, as you can see, basically it's 4 different models or 4 different shapes, and we need to group these together in order for them to print. So what we'll do now is we're going to take we're going to left click on our mouse, highlight this, going to go up here to the group tool, click that and group it, and now it's grouped all as one piece. So when you grab that and move it around on the work plane, it's not going to change. It's all going to be one group, which is really nice. That's what we want. We want all of these to be grouped so nothing is separate from each other. If you do want to do some further editing of your snowflake arms, you can click up here and ungroup them. You just want to remember that once you click on group, all of these will be separate parts, so they won't be grouped together. So if you try to move a part of this, like one arm, it's going to be, these are going to be left behind since the items are not grouped. So I'm going to group these again. And then I do like that color, but I like a little bit of more of a contrast with the work plane. So what you can do is you can change the color of a solid shape by going up here and clicking on that, the middle part of this solid icon. And you can choose whatever color you want, or you can do multicolor. You do want to note though that if you change the color of your model, that's not going to affect the color that it's going to be 3D printed at. This is just for your visual reference. That won't mean, so if I'm going to choose red, and when this gets exported out to get 3D printed, that doesn't mean it's going to be printed red. You'll need to actually note that when you email me with your file of what color you want it printed in. This basically, once you export this file, it's just going to be the model itself. It doesn't have any sort of information about what color it is when you make it. So that's just something to note. Okay, so moving on, the next step we're going to take is we're going to use the tube, put that on top of this to make it an ornament, to finalize it. So the tube tool will grab, move it onto the plane like that. So you've got all these things that you can play with, like the radius of the tube, the wall thickness, like that, how many sides it has. You can bevel it so it has more of a rounded shape. I'll zoom in, give you a better idea. So bevel it so it's a little less, it's got, you know, more of a kind of a curve to it, a beveled shape as they call it. So I'm just going to stick with the kind of standard tube shape right now. So what we want to do, if we remember what the height of this is, it's 2 millimeters, and you can check that by clicking right there. I want to change this to 2 millimeters as well, so it just fits smoothly with this model when we merge them together. So click on that, click the top right there, and what you can do is then just click on that little box and just type in 2 and enter, and it is changed now to 2 millimeters. So now what I'm going to do is you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. I'm going to use the down arrow to try to get this closer to the model. So I can group them together so they will fuse. So I'm going to move down like that. What I can do is change the snap grid right now to 0.1 millimeters just to get a little bit finer resolution as to like the movements of this going down. So you'll see in just a sec. So I just changed this snap grid tool and I'm using the down arrow key. I'm just going to move it down ever so slightly just so it kind of reaches the almost not past the top of this, but just really close, just so it's once I group these together, they will actually be fused, and this should work. So that looks pretty good to me. So got that. I'm going to zoom out. And now what I want to do is use my left mouse button to highlight these both, click on group, and now this is grouped. So I just noticed that this is a little big. I want to make it a bit smaller. So what I'm going to do is use the undo command. I'm going to take this and I'm going to change the size. Okay, so I'm going to resize this right now. So what I'm going to do is click on this and type in a value of 5 for 5 millimeters, and then I can click tab on my keyboard, and that's going to click over to that. And now I'm going to type 5 into that value as well, and click enter. So now it's 5 millimeters. So that should work as far as the size of it. I'm going to also just double check that it's the same height. So I will click on this model right there, It is 2 millimeters, and that works. That's what the height that we want, because that's the same as this one. So beforehand, if I want to move this, I made an error where I wanted to grab this with my left mouse button and move it down like this. But if I do that, you'll notice, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you have these highlighted and you grab it, it's going to change the proportion of your model, which you don't want. So I found a really easy way to kind of mitigate this and get around it without changing your model proportion is to click and highlight on this, and then you want to use the arrow keys on your keyboard to move it down here to fuse with the top of your model. And I'm going to change the snap grid to 1 millimeter. I'm going to move over with my right arrow key. I'm going to use my bottom arrow key to move it down like this. I'm going to zoom in and use my middle mouse button to pan over like that. And then I'm going to zoom in some more just so I get a better view. And I'm going to use my right arrow key to arrow over like that to move the model like that, and then move it down just like that. All right. And then I'm going to I want this to basically fuse with this to fuse with this just a little bit more. So I'm going to change the snap grid to 0.1 millimeters just so I get a little bit more control over moving this into this object. So now when I move this down, it's moving by 0.1 millimeter increments, so just small little increments. And this actually looks perfect. This should fuse nicely with this once we group. So once we're done with that, I'm going to change my view back up here to the home. I'm going to click the home button and click the top view. And I'm going to grab this like that, highlight both of those with my left mouse button, and then I'm going to click on group. So now this is grouped together. So now this should work as a 3D printable ornament. You should be able to click on export to export the file out under the STL file format, and it should 3D print, and it'll print nice and flat. So that should work really well as an ornament. So now we'll move on to the next ornament. All right, for this next ornament, we're going to make a circular ornament with a tree in the middle. So what we're first going to do is we're going to be using the cylinder tool for this model. We're going to take the cylinder tool, grab that over here onto the work plane. Now what I'm going to do is you want to make its size 45 millimeters this way and 45 millimeters this way. So click on that, click and type in 45 and then 45, click enter. And now we want to drop down the height of this. We don't want the model to be this thick in millimeters. So we're going to click on this, the height button right there. Click on that, and we're going to make it like the other ornament back here. We're going to make it 2 millimeters. Click enter. Now what we're going to do is we are going to make a duplicate of that, but we're going to make it into a hole. So what we can do is click on this. We're going to use the duplicate and repeat tool. I'm going to do Control D. What I'm going to do is move that copy out over here to this part of the plane. And now I just want to, basically because we're going to make this into a hole shape that's cutting through this, I just want to make this slightly smaller than this. So what I'm going to do is click right there. I'm going to make that each of these, and make this part 40 millimeters going that way, and click up here and make it 40 millimeters going that way. Click enter. Now, instead of a solid, I'm going to click on this and make it a hole. And so then what I'll do is I'm going to use my arrow tools to move this over to this. And my snap grid is still on 0.1 millimeters, so I'm going to change it to 1 millimeter, just so it's a bit quicker to move this over. I'm using my left arrow to move it over like this. And you can actually just hold down the left arrow to like make it move quicker instead of continuously clicking on that. I'm going to move it down like that. So that looks pretty good. I'm not totally sure if it actually is completely centered. So again, I'm going to go up, I'm going to use the align tool up here to align these two. So I'm going to highlight these both, click on the align tool, and I want to basically align it using this, clicking that right there, and then right there. And that should be nicely aligned to the middle of this object. So now we're done with the align tool. I'm going to click outside of like right here to get rid of the align tool. And now what I want to do is I want to fuse these. I want to group these together in order to make the hole through this solid object. So I'm going to take my left mouse button, highlight that, click group, and as you can see, now it's just a circle, like ring, so circular ring, or a ring shape. So now in order to make a tree shape, we'll go over to basic shapes, and sort of the main shape we want, basically it looks like a roof. So we're going to grab the roof object, we're going to move it over to our work plane like that. All right, we're going to move it like this, move our perspective, and we're going to use this tool right here to flip it over. I'm going to do it 90 degrees. So you want to stay inside, instead of moving this and going up into different angle increments, you want it to snap to the 22.5 degree increments. And we're going to snap it and move it towards, whoops. Sometimes it's a bit tricky, so it helps to get a little closer to the object, zoom in on it, and then grab it. So I'm going to move this to 90 degrees. Whoops. And then I'm going to click outside there, and I'm going to highlight this and press the letter D on my keyboard, and that's going to have it sit nice and flat on the work plane area right there. So now I want to slim this down. I don't want this to be so tall right now. It's 20 millimeters going this way, 20 millimeters high. I want to put it down to the size of this, which is 2 millimeters. So what I'll do is I'll highlight that, click there, click on that, and just type in the number 2, and then hit enter. So now it's 2 millimeters. Now I want to zoom out and change my view and use this top tool right here for the view cube. I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard to move this over. What I want to do is try to basically have it touch the top part of the circle, but be nicely aligned in the middle of that circle. So do something like that using my arrow keys. And then we'll align the shapes a little bit later. So now I'm going to make copies of this, but I'm going to increase the size of each section of the tree by 5 millimeters, and I'll show you in just a sec. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to click on this and use the duplicate and repeat tool again. So it's Control D. So the copy is fused with that right now. I'm going to use the bottom arrow keys to move the copy down ever so slightly to there. And now what I want to do is increase the size of this model going this way by 5 millimeters. So instead of 20 millimeters, I'm going to make it 25, which is going to increase the size. So now I'm going to have to click on this model and use my arrow keys to sort of realign it, and then we'll use the align tool later on to align all of the copies that I'm going to make. So zoom in a little bit and move this over, change the snap grid tool to 0.25 millimeters, see if that helps. And what I can do, if I want to use this as kind of a reference point, this line right there, I can just highlight these, and then you can use your arrow key to move over if you want to use that as a reference point, if that helps you. Okay, so now we're going to basically do the same thing for each one of these and just basically increase the size of this by 5 millimeters going this way. So I'll do the same thing. Click on that. I'm going to type Control D on my keyboard. Use the arrow key to move this down like that. Of course, like I said, it doesn't need to be exact. Kind of however you want to make this is fine. Feel free to just use this as a reference. So move it down like that, and I'm going to change the size of this down here from 25 millimeters to 30. Then I'm going to take this and use the arrow key to move it back over. So it's just so the top of this is just basically on this line. And I'll keep doing that. Move this down. Oops. Change the size of that to 35 millimeters. Move that over. And just do the same thing. Control D. Move this down like that. And then change the size to, I'll do it 40 millimeters. So now once we increase the size of that, this is going to be touching that. So that's probably good enough at that point for the parts of that tree. So I'm going to move this, before we get to that, I'm going to move this over like that. Okay, and then what I'll do is try to align these. So I'm going to highlight all of these, go up here to the Align tool, and I want to align them just like that. If you click that, those all should align properly. It looks pretty good. So, all right, now I want to make basically the trunk of the tree. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to use the box shape over here. Now, of course, the box shape is pretty tall and pretty wide, so I'm going to take this, click up there, take down the height to 2 millimeters. And then what I want to do is change this so it is, let's see, 15 millimeters by 15. That's a pretty thick trunk, so I'm going to actually make it, I'll try 5 millimeters by 5. Oh, that's not totally what I wanted. So 5 going this way and 15 this way. Let's see how that looks. I'm going to change my view, go up to the top view cube up there like that, so I get a better top-down view. Use my arrow keys to move this down, and I'm just pressing down on my arrow key to make it move quicker, move faster. Move it down to there, use my left arrow key to move it over like this. All right. Move that up a little bit. Now we'll zoom in using the middle mouse scroll wheel button. And you can see now this tree trunk is going to fuse with this as well as that, which that's what you want to get it to 3D print. So this doesn't print as one separate part. You want to make sure these are all fused together. And basically the way that we're doing that is we're fusing this part of the model with the top of this, and we're fusing the bottom part of the tree with the sides right there, and then the trunk fusing this with that part, and then the bottom part of the trunk with this. So we use the Align tool again to get this nicely aligned. I might make this a little bit thinner going this way. So I'll actually change it to, let's say, 2 millimeters. See what that looks like. That looks like pretty good. So now I'll make sure this is nicely aligned to all of this. So we'll zoom out and highlight all of this stuff, go up to the Align tool, and we're just going to click on this to have it aligned nicely to that section. So click that, and it's nicely aligned. So now what we want to do is group these together to fuse them all as one model. So I'm going to highlight these, click on Group, and now they're fused into one whole model. Now what you can do too is you can keep making parts of the tree if you want. I think I'd probably just increase the size a little too much up here. So if you just go with smaller sizes of each duplicate part of the tree, you probably won't you won't get to this part like I did as quickly. So it kind of just depends on how you want to model your tree, but this is hopefully just a kind of a good idea of how this kind of ornament is made. So now to finalize this, we want to again use the tube tool. And actually, you know, what we can do is we can switch it up and use the torus tool. Grab this, move it over like this. As you can see, it sort of looks like a donut. But it can be used just the same as the tube tool. So what we'll want to do is move our view over like that, zoom in. I want to make this the same size as this, going from the work plane upwards, which is 2 millimeters. So what I'm going to do is click on this, click on that, and right now it's 5 millimeters. All I got to do is type in the number 2, and that should work. Now it's the same height as this model right there. So this is kind of, it's pretty big, elongated, so I'm going to change the size of it a little bit. And so I'm going to click on Shift and grab that little box right there. Move it down to, yeah, that looks pretty good at like 10. Let's just change it to an even number. 10 millimeters on each side. Like that. Go back to my top view. Move up a little bit. Zoom in a bit. Use my arrow keys again. Go right just a little bit with that. And then seems pretty well centered, but I'll use the alignment tool again to make sure it's nicely centered. I'm going to move this down like this using my bottom arrow key. And you want to basically have it come all the way down and meet it, so it's just basically fusing into that shape. Oh, and I just realized that for some reason, I think when I resize this, it just changed the height of it. So what I want to do is have it match the height of this 2 millimeters. So I'll click that again, click up there and make it 2. So just type in the number 2, hit enter, and that should work a little bit better. As you can see, they're now the same height. Now I'll move over with my mouse, change up my view. Now I'm going to use my arrow keys again just to have this fuse with this bottom model just a little bit more, just so when I group them, there's a lot, they'll fuse together nicely and it'll work for 3D printing. Okay, so I'll zoom out a little bit. And now I want to highlight both of these, and then I'll click on group. And now they're grouped as one whole ornament, and this should 3D print really well as well, just because it is nicely sitting flat. But that gives you an idea of how to create a circular type ornament with a tree design in the middle of it with the circular part so you can hang it. So now we're on to the next. For this next ornament, we're going to go away from the basic shapes in TinkerCAD. We're going to use the featured shape generators. I'll click on all, and we're going to use what's called the facet sphere, which if we scroll down can be found on page 5 of this. All right, this the facet sphere is right here. We're going to grab this. We're going to move this over to the work plane. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the shape of this. We're going to elongate it out so it is 30 millimeters this way and 30 this way. So I'll click that and I'll type in 30, hit enter. Click up here, type 30, hit enter. And then as far as the height of it goes, we're going to change it to 5 millimeters. Click up there, change it from 20 and put in 5 and hit enter. And now we're going to change our view to the front view. Click right there. And I'm going to use my middle scrolling mouse button to pan over a bit. So I'm going to click that and pan over like that. And we're going to use the duplicate and repeat tool again. But we're going to use a kind of weirder, more interesting angle to duplicate this at. So I'm going to click that or do Control D. I'm going to do Control D. And then so there's the copy of it that's merged with this first model. What I'm going to do is click that. So I want to move this around, but instead of doing it in 22.5 degree increments, I want to move up here and do it at 33 degree increments. I found this is kind of an interesting angle for this particular ornament. All right, and so now what I want to do is take that shape and I want to duplicate and repeat it. So I'll do Control D again and do the same thing. Move it in 33 degree increments to 33. And now what I can do is actually just click Control D to repeat it again. And it should go in a 33 degree increment continuously. I'll do Control D again, like that. And you've got this kind of interesting looking, I would say it's sort of like slices of an orange. So just in a way, or like a weird looking kind of flower shape looking at like this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to group these together. So I want to take my left mouse button and highlight all of these. And as you can see, this consists of 5 shapes. Now we're going to group these together. So I'll click on group, group that. Okay, so now it's one shape. What I want to do is move this, I want to rotate this around so it faces upwards, and I'll show you. So we'll take this tool right there, we'll click this, we're going to use the fixed increments for this, and go to 90 degrees, and then I'm going to press D on my keyboard to have it sit nice and flat on the work plane. So now all we need to do is add a circle shape to the top to make it hang. But as you can see, it's kind of it's a pretty interesting looking shape. And one thing to note is when it is printed, it's going to need support below right there. So it might be when you take off supports from 3D prints, the model, the part that has the support is going to be a little rough, have a little bit of roughness to it, but you can always sand those parts down a little bit using just a regular like wood sanding paper. So just to let you know, this can be printed, but it's going to have to print upwards like this, and there's going to be some support material right there. So moving along, so we'll get out of the shape generators. We'll go back up to basic shapes. We will bring out the tube like that. Let's see. And we're going to, let's see, zoom out and rechange our view to the top like that. Take my middle scrolling mouse button and move down like that so I get a better view, top down of this. I want to change this to, let's do 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters. So 10 right there, and I can click the tab tool on my keyboard, or just click up there and type in 10. So that looks like that should work for our purposes. So now I don't want this to be that tall. I want it to be, I'd say, it could be 2 millimeters. I'd say probably for strength, just because there's more mass to this shape than there is to those. I'm gonna take it down to 5 millimeters and see how that looks. Oh, that should work. It's a little bit bigger, so I'm going to take it down half that to 2.5 millimeters. I'm going to zoom in, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool right there to move it upwards in the plane. I'm going to zoom out, use my right mouse button tool to pan around like that, and I'm going to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to try to move this closer to this sort of sphere shape that we made. Right? Zoom in a little bit just to make it easier to see what I'm doing. I'm going to use my mouse, or my left button on my keyboard, the left arrow button, to move it just close enough to where then we can reorientate it. Okay. So that's pretty close. And I can change my view right now. I'm going to go up here and go to the top view. Click on top like that. And then I'm going to use my arrow keys just to basically have this try to hover the bottom part, just so it's kind of like touching the top of this right there. Now what I want to do is I want to use the rotation tool again, and I'm going to use fixed increments. It's going to stay down here as I have this clicked. Oh, I don't want to do that. All right. Change it to, well, I guess it's going to do, there we go, there's the fixed increments. I'm going to take it to 90 degrees. I'm going to use the up arrow on my keyboard just to kind of move it slightly out of the way. I'm going to use this tool to move it up like that, just ever so slightly. I'm going to reset my orientation. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, zoom out, just to kind of reorientate my view so I can kind of figure out where this is all going. Go on this side and zoom in. Use my arrow keyboard, or my arrow key, sorry. Slightly move this over. Oh, you'd have that highlighted first. Using my right arrow key right now to move it over like that. Okay. So I've got it basically on the top of that, but I want it nicely aligned. So I'm going to zoom out, highlight both of these, and I want to change my view up here to the left view so I kind of get like a nice straight head-on view of this to try to align it. So now I'm going to click the Align tool. I'm going to try to align this. Basically, I don't want to align it like that because this will move this shape up to there, and I'll just click it to show you. So you don't want that. So I'm going to do the Undo button. Highlight this again, do the Align tool. I want it nicely aligned along that axis. So if I click that, that should align it perfectly to the top of this. So that worked. So now what I want to do is I'll click on the outside of that to get out of the alignment tool. I want to basically have this little ring going down into this just a little bit more, just so there's a little bit more of a fusion of the two models. So I'm going to go over here to my snap grid and change it to 0.1 millimeters. Use my down arrow key. Let's see. Actually, no, I don't want to use my down arrow key for that. It's probably best to use this little button right there, little icon, and move it down just slightly like that. So it's not, so the top of that isn't going through the ring like that, but just so it's fusing together with it nicely just before it comes out from that part of the ring through there. So that looks pretty good right now. That should, when it when it prints, it should fuse those two separate models nicely. I'm going to zoom out, and now what I want to do is group these two in order to make it 3D printable. I'll highlight these both, and I'm going to click the group. Use the group tool to do that. Click group. So now these are all grouped as one thing, and that should be 3D printable. What might happen too is I might need to print this with a little bit of support up here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So if you do decide to make a ornament like this, I might just set the print up to have a little bit of support, and it's pretty easy to remove from an area like that. So it just kind of depends on the model and whether the printer can handle certain angles up here like that. So anyway, this is what this ornament looks like. I hope it was fun to learn how to do this model. It used a few extra tools like alternating angles in order to make this kind of like sliced oranges kind of shape that got fused into one sphere. All right, now we'll move on to the next one. So for this final ornament, we're just going to take a basic shape. We're going to flatten it out. We're going to duplicate it multiple times and add some text, and then a simple image that we find online for free on top of that ornament. So it's going to look pretty cool. I'll show you how to do it right now. So what we want to do is go back over to basic shapes. We're going to choose the polygon shape. Now we want to go up here and change that height to 2 millimeters. Enter. Now let's go to the top view again up here using the top view cube. I'm going to zoom in, kind of get this so it's nice and centered on my screen so it's easier to see when I'm duplicating it. So now with this highlighted and selected, I'm going to use the duplicate and repeat tool. I'm just going to use Control D, the shortcut. And then I'm actually going to move it in the fixed increment of 22.5 degrees, like you can see right there. So move this. It says negative 22.5, but what you can do is change it that way, and it's 22.5 that way. So I'm just going to keep duplicating it and repeating it. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So I like that shape. It's kind of interesting looking. It looks like it consists of 6 shapes that have just been duplicated and repeated this way. So now I'm going to group it. And I want to make this a little bit bigger. I don't want it to be this small. So I'm going to go down here, click on that tool right there. I'm going to increase the size by 75 millimeters. I'm going to hit tab. I'm going to do 75 going this way. Hit enter. All right. So now I want to move this back up to the work plane. Now what I want to do is add some text to this, some Christmassy text. So we're going to use the text tool for this, which is also under basic shapes. Grab that text tool, bring it out here. You can see it comes out pretty large. We're going to resize that in just a second. First, we want to change our text. I'm going to change mine to Merry Christmas. Now what I want to do is actually change the sizing of this as well as the height of the letters. You can change the height of the letters using this tool right here if you want. I actually prefer to just type in the value. So I'm going to click on that and type in 4 for 4 millimeters. And now I want to resize the lettering so it actually will fit onto this. So I'm going to click on Shift, click on that box, and move it like so. Whoops. Okay. And I'm going to move it, make it just a little bit smaller as well. I'm going to use my right arrow to move it inwards like this. So as you can see, the text now is actually behind this. So we'll change that. We'll click on this and zoom in, move our perspective. Now we're going to use this handy dandy tool right here to move this up into space like that. I'm just going to move it back down. So just nicely kind of going into the model like that. We'll zoom back out. And it looks like we do need to resize this some more. So I'm going to click Shift again. Use that box. Okay, that looks like that should work. Use the arrow tool to arrow over, to move down like that into the model. I'm going to use my align tool to actually get this aligned towards the center of this. Highlight this, click my align tool, align it by clicking that and by clicking that. Now it should be aligned to the center of this. So the next thing we want to do, we actually don't want this text to be, coming out of this model like that. I actually want to basically have it cutting into this. So it actually gives you kind of a negative image effect, I guess. I'll show you in just a sec what I mean by that. We're going to turn this into a whole instead of the solid, this text. So I'll click on the text, click to whole. All right, now you can kind of see it's just slightly cutting into that model. And what we want to do next after that is group them together so we can get the full effect. You can see what it looks like. I'm going to zoom out, highlight these both, click on group. All right, and so now you can kind of see that. I'm actually going to click on this and change the color so you can see the contrast a little bit better. Change it to green and see if that works. So there we go. All right, so now you can see Merry Christmas is actually going to be on this model, but it'll have the effect like it was cut out from that when it's getting 3D printed. All right, so now what I want to do is add an image to this that I found online. And what's really cool about TinkerCAD is that you can actually import two-dimensional images called SVG files. They're a basic graphic file that you can actually use in TinkerCAD, which is really cool. It just increases the creativity that you can do in TinkerCAD. So if you go up here to import, click that like you would be importing a 3D model saved from that website Thingiverse that we had talked about earlier. You can actually do 2D files as well, like I was saying. And particularly, they're called SVG files. Now, I did a little searching online, and I found a website that you can download free SVG files for personal use. So you should be able to look on this website for whatever sort of thing that you're into, whether it's sports or a Christmassy thing. Find an image, and then you can actually import that image into TinkerCAD. I'll show you what it's going to look like. I want to search for reindeer. And with these kind of files, you want to go with something really simple, basically like that or like that. You don't want to go with something with a lot of detail like that or like that. It's just not really going to work very well when it's 3D printed. So I think I really kind of like this one right there. So I'm going to click on that Christmas reindeer image. You click on download SVG. All right, we'll click back over to TinkerCAD. I'm going to go to the import function. I'm going to choose the file. That's the one I just downloaded. I'll click open. So actually it looks like this is a really, really large image. So it's going to be much larger than the workspace. So what we can do is scale this down to, instead of 100%, let's go down to 10%. All right, and then we will click import to import this image. I'll show you what it looks like in a second. Usually it takes about a few seconds or two to import. So this is what it looks like. It's this interesting, it took a two-dimensional image and it turned it into something 3D that has depth. So that's super huge. So we actually want to make it much smaller so it fits right there underneath Merry Christmas. So what I'm going to do is proportionally make it smaller. I'm going to click on the Shift button, and then I'm going to grab that guy right there, and just move my mouse up like that, and make it so it's pretty much, you can eyeball it to where you think it's going to fit underneath there. So this might still be too big, but we'll see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my arrow keys on my keyboard, the down arrow, move it down like that, move it down over like this. Oh, and as you can see, it's actually, well, it might just barely fit on there, but I'm going to make it a little bit smaller just to be safe. So I'm going to hold down Shift, click on that box, make it just a bit smaller. Just like that. That looks good to me. All right, so once you've done that, you can zoom in and actually take a look and see how it's going to look on your ornament. So if we go to the side profile, you can actually see what it's doing now is it is slightly cutting into this model. What we want to do is actually bring it upwards so it has some depth onto this model. So I'm going to grab that tool again. So you can see that little cone, just bring it up a little bit like that. Not that's too far, but just ever so slightly like that, but 2 millimeters up. I'm going to click on this, so it looks like this is 2.04 millimeters, so I'm going to make it 3 millimeters, the height of this. And then I'm just going to bring this down just ever so slightly. So just barely kind of goes into this model. Okay, so that's what it will look like on this. So now what we want to do is group this. Or first, actually before grouping it, we want to align all the elements. So we want to align this up with this so it looks good. So we'll highlight that as I've done. Go up here. We want to click that to align it right there to the middle. It looks like it's all right. It looks a little too big, so I'm going to even make it smaller. I'm going to click Shift, click on that box right there, move that like that. Now I'm going to use my down arrow key to just move it down slightly. All right, so I like that. I think that's going to look pretty cool. 3D print it out. So now I'm going to group these, group them together. All right, so now the last element is to put a little hoop at the top so you can hang it. So now what we'll do is we will grab the tube tool right there. So with the tube tool, we're going to change the size of it. Click on it and change this to 5 millimeters. Tab over, make it 5 millimeters. And we'll change the height of it as well. So I'm going to click on this. And it looks like this is 3.66 millimeters. So I think I might make this a little bit taller. So I'm going to just type in 4. So it's got a little bit more presence. Now I'm going to change this to the same height as that. And click on this. So instead of 10 millimeters, I'm going to type 4 and enter. Rechange my view and move this up like that. Move it over like that with my arrow keys on my keyboard. All right, now I'm going to zoom in and finish up trying to get this aligned so it works. Zoom out. I'll highlight this. Use the align tool again. I want to align it like that. Whoops, like that. Let's see. Align tool. So let's see. Nope, don't want to do that. And so I'm going to do undo on that. So it looks like it's actually relatively well aligned right there. So I'm just going to keep it as is. Zoom in again. Now this ring is going a little bit too much into here. So I'm going to change my grid, editing grid down to 1 millimeter or 0.1 millimeters. Click on that. So now I have a little bit more finite control over the movements of this. So now I'm just going to move it just like so, just so it kind of basically touches this model. All right. This a little bit. Sometimes it's really good. You can really zoom in if you'd like. move it ever so slightly, just so we don't want to go that far. We basically just want to have it like that. And it should, when it prints, fuse together as one. So I'm going to zoom out now. And what I might actually do is make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it 8 millimeters. Tab over 8. Because I'm not sure what the density of this is going to be when it's printed, so it's better to be safe to have this ring be able to hold it. So rechange my view again, zoom in. I'm going to move this little ring up just so it's basically just past that being right there. So I'm going to move it up like that, and that should actually work really well. So I'm going to zoom out, highlight all of these and group them together like that. And now it's all fused as one. And so now we have another 3D printable ornament that should actually print really easily because it's flat, but it also integrates some text that we used over here, and then an image that we converted from a two-dimensional thing to a three-dimensional image and laid on top of this. So hopefully you have fun with this part of the tutorial. You can get really creative with it and play around with sort of different designs and text. And in the next video, I will show you the final results that have been 3D printed. So thank you for watching. All right, well, thank you for watching that whole video. I hope you learned something and it was fun for you to engage with all of that. I wanted to show you how the models came out. So this is the first one we did. It's that Snowflake Ornament. It actually turned out pretty well. I printed it in this red filament for kind of a Christmassy tone to it. We also have this circle ornament with the tree in it. That turned out pretty well as well. So that should hang pretty well on a tree. We've also got the little bulb ornament, which actually printed a little bit smaller, so I'd probably print it a little bit bigger next time, but otherwise it turned out well. You can see the support material that you got to rip off, but otherwise it turned out pretty well. And then for the last ornament, there's that little tag ornament with the, hopefully you can see it, Merry Christmas, and the reindeer on it. I guess you can see it a little bit better with the light shining on it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed learning how to do this. I'm going to put my information on the video below so you can email me your model files once you're done if you'd like me to 3D print those for you. We just charge 5 cents per gram of plastic. Usually most models are about a couple dollars each. When you do have us print your models, if you could try to keep the size about as big as that, that would be great. I'm not sure how many models I'm going to get emailed, so trying to keep them in a manageable size should help us be able to print everything for you guys. So again, I'm going to put my email and information on the video just below my face, so feel free to reach out if you'd like me to 3D print these items that you made. So thanks again, and I hope it was fun, and have a Merry Christmas. Thanks.